Sort of talk about these agencies up here, but if you're hungry, keep on out, get a plate of food. What will not consider disrespectful or will not write your name down on a sheet. That idea I had about writing down questions is a total failure. Somebody else better write it. Somebody can. But what we did is, and I added Trevor to this because we have 5 different chiefs, basically, that are involved in the accreditation process, or accreditation manager, that are involved with their agencies, and some of them had good, bad, and troubling experiences. So I'm going to just do a quick. No, we said there's no rules. Go out and eat when you're hungry. There's go get food. Come on back in. Whatever you want to do. So they've just been at different spots in their accreditation or whatever you want to say. So do a quick introduction of where your department's at in accreditation, and if you had any major issues.
I'm not a chief. I'm Captain Trevor Wilson with IFD, as Chief Dower said before. We just moved to applicant status about a week and a half ago. We have been in registered status for 4 years. So we were registered for 3, got through the end of January last year, looked at where we were at and thought that it didn't make sense to start that applicant clock early. We went ahead and paid the fee to re-up as a registered agency. And then we were able to move and make the move, like I said, last month up to applicant status, which allowed us to roll that money that we had paid for the registered status into our applicant costs. So basically we were given a 4th year registered agency for free in doing that. So we are, it's a huge cultural shift for us. We've not been accredited before. We're having to go through and develop a lot of different systems and really just kind of change the face and the structure of how we do business on a day-to-day basis. But that said, while there was a lot of blowback at the beginning, I think that people are seeing the value and the utility of this process, and that we really weren't that far off from where we needed to be. We just needed to have a more structured approach to how we're going about our day-to-day business.
My name is John Donahue with the Delaware Fire Department, just north of Columbus. We're a registered agency, and we hope to move to applicant status later this year. We've been registered for quite some time, but been taking on a lot of other projects. We just built a 3rd and 4th fire stations, replacing apparatus and so forth. But most of the material that we've been using is because of the accreditation process and the data. Just a little bit of background. I was formerly accreditation manager down in Florida prior to coming here to Ohio. Served as a team leader as far as peer assessor, and also now serving as a mentor for new departments as well, going through accreditation.
Were you from Ohio, or were you from?
I was originally from the Cincinnati area, went down to Florida, and then came back home for the family. Yeah, I know.
You know what snow is.
I know.
Perfect.
Mike Kennedy, Chief of the Ann Arbor Fire Department. I'd probably have a little bit more of a tale of caution regarding this. So this time last year, our department was a applicant, and at that time I was a newly hired assistant chief from the outside. First time the department ever went outside, and was kind of told, oh, we're all set, ready to do accreditation, and Mike, we just need you to, we're at the 1 yard line, you just pick up the ball and everyone will cheer in accreditation. As I got into it, first it was a minor train derailment, and then it was a chlorine car leak, and then it was chlorine car and propane tanker on fire. And where we were at compared to where we needed to be were drastically different. And so a lot of having to put together a pretty objective situation to the city manager, because I was basically afraid the music was going to stop and I wasn't going to have a chair and be blamed for our lack of accreditation. I kind of could see where the holes in the cheese were lining up on this. It unfortunately ended up costing the previous chief, I think it was kind of a final nail with city administration that was promised that we were right there. So we've actually reverted back to registered status. This process has been wonderful because it's given us the roadmap. We had SOPs that hadn't been updated since 2001 that were still current SOPs. So we've developed a roadmap and a plan, but it's probably pushed accreditation out to like 2022 at earliest for us. One of the most powerful things we're trying to switch our PSAP centers, so very identical, almost identical situation to what KZU County went through, and using some of these times to prove why we want to move and show some of the failures of our current setup. So it's been a hugely powerful process. The other one too that I would kind of put out there is previous administrations had sold 1710 or die, and that in order to be accredited you had to meet 1710. And our department, we can't meet it. There's no physical way for us to meet it. And so I've also had to do a lot of walking back of 1710 is a good thing, but we can't meet it unless you want to give me 2 more stations and 20 guys, and then the room gets real quiet. So that's been another big struggle of kind of selling these expectations, and this 1710's been used as a hammer against me, which has been very interesting, because having to, well, all the other chiefs said that this was what we needed to do. Well, it would be great, I'd love it, but again, I need 2 more stations and a whole bunch of folks in order to make that happen, and trying to explain to them, given our current setup, we couldn't do that. I know I'm going a bit on a rabbit hole, but I was able to actually elicit our city GIS to prove to city administration we couldn't do it based on the own city GIS models. So it's, I've got a lot of good stories with accreditation, but I told people I was 6 feet tall and 150 pounds before I became fire chief. So,
Chief, you said you have. I mean, I saw your strategic plan. Was it a new one 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah.
Excellent strategic plan. Is that still? I know part of it. Even
no, we've had, because all of that was based on 1710, and there was also some ideas of wanting to do ALS transport, which would be another multi-million-dollar investment, and so yeah.
I'll just jump in as a team leader, especially for people that are just looking at this first time. You do not need to meet 1710. I do not know. I deal with 60 to 80 fire departments a year. I know not one that meets 1710. There is not one accredited agency in the country that meets 1710. Period. Can't do it. Most people use that as a consensus standard because it's easy. There are a few fire departments that have looked at reasonable benchmarks, and I don't get to jump in on this, but I guess I'll speak for the team leader and I get to be, but there's people that haven't looked at, I mean, I knew Alan Lawrence, I went out there, I was team lead out there. They said, we understand 1710's there, but we're gonna set our own turnout time. So they did their own studies in the stations, with their stopwatch, and they set their own benchmark. So just thought I'd throw that in. You do not need to meet 1710. So they were wrong before you were right. Sorry, Chief.
I'm Joshua Meyer, Director of Public Safety in Canton Township, previously Fire Chief. With me today, I got my Fire Chief and Fire Chief Chris Stockline, Deputy Fire Chief Jamie Strasner. Jamie's our Accreditation Manager. Like many of your agencies, we had some very ambitious goals when we started this accreditation process back in 2013. I probably set some really unrealistic goals for our agency, thinking that we were going to take this registered status and do it in a year and a half, and then jump into applicant status. And we realized really quickly that we were a little bit in over our heads. Like many of the departments we talked about this morning, data collection, dispatch was our biggest challenge. Our agency, like Kalamazoo, or not like Kalamazoo, we're a nominally consolidated public safety department, and what I mean by that is we share administrative roles with the police department, but our police and fire are separate. Our police officers are not firefighters, our firefighters are not police officers. But the challenges that came is when we look at our dispatch center operates on a CLEMIS system, which is designed for law enforcement and courts. It was not set up or intended originally when designed for fire departments. So to try to track, to use it to track turnout times, et cetera, we ran into a lot of challenges. We worked with Metro Airport, who went through the accreditation process, also uses CLEMIS to figure out what we needed to do to fix our times, because quite frankly, to get 3 years worth of accurate data, I couldn't get 3 minutes worth of accurate data out of CLEMIS. And so we had to really kind of fix that before we could go any further. And then Most recently, our challenge was our 5-year strategic plan that was written originally when we started accreditation, expired at the end of 2018. And so we had to rewrite that. That's done, and now we're at the phase where we're hoping to have our on-site this summer and then go before the commission in the fall.
So you're gonna upload by March 30th, right?
March 31st, I believe, is the deadline. Yeah. Is it 30? I don't know. It's March, yeah. So that's the goal.
Perfect. And then you're in charge of police there,
Yes.
and you're the largest accredited municipality?
We were. Grand Rapids just took the largest
For
accredited
police?
police.
So they're police, they're CALIA, and
Yeah. So we're police department's been CLIA accredited for about 10 years now, and on that side, we're actually going to use CLIA to accredit our dispatch. So we started that process this year. So by the end of all of this, our fire department will be accredited, our police department will be CLIA, and dispatch will be CLIA accredited.
that's great. Now, did you run the police accreditation for CALIA? Were you the accreditation manager for CALIA, like Mark Lee is at Detroit area?
I am not. The way that our organizational structure works on the both sides of the house, I have a deputy chief, and the deputy chiefs are responsible as they act as the accreditation manager. So on fire, it's Jamie. On the police side, it's Craig Wilshire,
Got it.
accreditation manager.
Yep.
Doug Isaacs, I'm deputy chief for Bowling Green Fire Division, just down the road, I-75, a few miles. We probably come close to holding the record for registered agency in perpetuity. And we started this process back in the late 90s and kept rolling over the registered agency status. Finally got down to the point, I was the accreditation manager, I said, we need to pull the trigger on this or stop. So we did, and that was back 2012, and we wound up with a deferral first time out of the gate. So 6 months later, we were successful with that. The deferral gave us an opportunity. Big issue we had the data collected, we had good data, but how we were presenting our standard recovery, how we developed our standard recovery was a major issue there. So it allowed us to get some additional systems in place and get some of that buttoned up. And fast forward to now, through our 5-year cycle, and we're up for reaccreditation. Currently, we're on a delay. It's kind of the same issue again, that looking at our standard to cover, now the issue is how we're doing our risk assessment, divvying up whatever scheme you want to use to perform your risk assessment, and kind of buttoning that up, and we're hopefully going to get a site visit here in March, or now I'm hearing maybe April. So I don't know how that's going to work with CFAI's timeline, but that is what it is.
Great. All right. Does anybody have any quick questions right off the bat for anybody? Let's just start here. I'll go some of these questions. Who's not in control of their dispatch? Oh, that's about right, 80%. The rest of the country's not in control of dispatch centers either. You hear it from every agency you go to. We're not in control. So when you don't control it, if you're not in control there, how do you control response time when you're not in control? So in this case, probably alarm processing. You're not in control of your dispatch center, alarm processing. What can you do? Issues? Is there issues with that? Go ahead, Chief Donahue.
I'll go ahead and take it. We're in a unique situation in Delaware County. We have our own 911 center countywide. And with that, there is an executive board. It's an advisory board that oversees that. But they are also pursuing CLIA accreditation, and part of that process has been documenting times. And from the fire aspect of it, there's 3 fire department members that serve on the board, as well as 3 law enforcement that serve on the board. We've been pushing standards, and with that 1221 from NFPA and standards based on NFPA 1710 and also 1720 from that standpoint, because we do have volunteer departments. It's been very successful, in so much that the county administrator now is requiring on a monthly basis a metric report be provided to him, as well as all board members, that indicate where the county stands on their dispatch processing time, and to the 90th percentile. So we've been very fortunate from that end to not really, we force the issue, not having any type of regulatory control over that.
Okay, anybody else on it?
We had a little different situation where we were doing our own dispatching. And 3 years ago, we decided that wasn't a real productive use of our manpower because we always had a firefighter assigned to that position rather than get them on the street. We approached the county about doing our dispatching for us. And our sheriff was more than happy to step up until he found out exactly what all was involved there. And some of the issues, initially trying to interface with the police, the CAD system was built out for law enforcement. So from the ground up, it's on some pretty shaky foundations, and we're the first fire EMS agency to be brought into that system. There's other agencies that are also starting to come into it and also looking at doing dispatching for other counties. So that kind of lit a fire in them as far as stepping it up and looking at the fire EMS aspect of it, bringing their operations into something that's more compatible with what our goals are. So we've been moving that direction. The other thing that we've got going on is our local police departments, they do their own dispatching, and we've got the university, Bowling Green State University, that has their own police department that does their own dispatching. So essentially we've got a county agency, local police department, and university police department that all have to interface with that and be able to communicate. They're all getting on that CAD system, but it's kind of a work in progress. And obviously the cycles are coming up, our times are kind of blown up 6 ways of the Sunday. But we've got a good handle on why the times are what they are, and we're able to explain that. So.
Yeah, so we actually use a private EMS system for our dispatch, and we've been able to show through accreditation their failures.
Failures?
Yeah, so it's empowered us to go to our elect city leadership and say we need to look at other options. So being able to show how they're not meeting it because they're basically kind of the Walmart of EMS in our area. No one can fight them.
Right.
But by showing the figures, we've been able to get our city leadership to open the conversation of another dispatch center. So.
Has anybody had issues getting data from the dispatch center where they say, we can't produce it, we can't give you what you want? Has anybody had those issues?
Go ahead, sir.
We had that issue when I was the fire chief and trying to work. Primarily our dispatch center is controlled by the police department. So again, we have this director of public safety who oversees that. Previously to my promotion, the director of public safety always came from the police department. So as fire chief, I'm trying to explain to the police director of public safety why these things are important. Times in the police department, and at least in our police department at the time, were important, but they were done quite differently than what we needed for fire accreditation. He was receptive after understanding it, and we were able to go in and make those changes. But again, we started off internally, we had pushback from dispatchers that said, this is impossible, we can't do this, there's no way, we don't have time, we're too busy, the system won't work. Then we went to Clemens, we had pushback from Clemens, and so it's just, you beat your head against the wall long enough and you finally end up making progress, but you gotta stick with it, you gotta explain it and help them understand why it's important. That's the struggle we had.
Anybody else have big issues with getting data from?
Yeah, along those same lines, we had legacy issues where we had a CAD that was about 25 years old. We were unable to get primary PSAP time for about 3 years into the process, and then what we were able to get was a very, very limited amount of data. While that data clearly existed in a database, we could not gain access to it. We were handcuffed with the reports that were already canned and had been decided upon in the early 80s. And some of those offered some value, but it was maddening to see where you can tell me, what percent of our calls are answered in 10 seconds and 20 seconds, but I can't get 15. That was, somewhat frustrating. But kind of, echoing what you said, for us, clear and consistent communication has absolutely been the key. And I know that goes without saying, but I think that you can never take for granted, even in the fire service, even in our department, when we want to know how many fires we've had and someone calls communications and asks for that number, 3 different people might ask that question in 3 slightly different ways and get 3 completely different numbers. And that's not exactly what this is about, but it is about making sure that, to the best of your ability, all parties are 100% clear on exactly what you want and why you want it, and then not take no for an answer. If you're capturing those times, you can get those times some way, somehow. It may require more legwork on your side, but for us, we've had to fight that battle not just with our dispatch, not with the PSC, but then through AT&T and then through their PSAP provider who they worked with initially. Over and over told, no, we can't get that. No, we can't get that. And then eventually, like I said, we got to the point where I feel confident we've gotten what they can give us. It's not what we want. And then it was just a waiting game for the new CAD to come on. But our big takeaway was being 100% clear about what our ask expectations were, and then specifically what data points are we looking for and why.
Just a quick review too is rule 1 is there are no rules. So if you weren't in here, if you're hungry, get up. We will not consider food, even if a panelist has food. Second of all, if you have a question, you hear something, you got 5 intelligent people up there that run the departments, accreditation manager, please feel free to raise your own hand and ask questions when I get there.
Motorola, P1.
And people that have been team leaders,
It went live October
anything you want to throw in as a statement, feel free. This is an open forum, and you get questions answered.
It's such a dramatic improvement from what we had, yes. The customer service is
I can tell you, I went to
awful
a
last month
one-station
about returning
department. I was a
calls.
team lead
It's
last
frustrating.
year. It was a
How about
one-station
you?
department. They had put together an ERF in 15 years. And the chief was how would I say it with due respect? He basically
Yeah.
But luckily, he had Orange County sitting right next to him, who made up the entire ERF on if they would
We
ever
didn't see
fire.
them. We did see
They
the
had-
Tyler.
I
And
think it was
we liked the Tyler
automatic
product a
with
lot.
Orange County, huge fire department.
Our deal was already.
Well, they also
when that
had,
conversation
so this
started,
one
the decision
agency
maker was a dog
had
on the
2
show.
dispatch
They made up
centers.
their mind. We're
At
getting
Orange
this
County, which is run by the sheriffs, and San Diego, which is run by, I think it was the military side of it, on the San Diego side. But to make a long story short, we sat with the chief, and he said, we can't get the data. So can you be accredited without having the data? Again, he sat right there and said, no, we can't get the data. Again, I'm not smart, but I want to know, have you tried? And of course, he's not going to show you. Have you tried? No. So he sat at his computer, I had to help him write an email to the head director of Orange County. And before we left on the site visit, Orange County did just that. They sent over all the data. They had great reports. It was an accredited agency. They knew exactly what they're doing. But that's what you have to do is if you can't get the data, which happens all across the country, you have problems with them. They're terrible. You at least got to make an effort. If you can't get it, you're not in control of it, so. But make an effort. Anybody else? Any other statements, questions in that?
Just remember, you may not control it, but you can influence it. And that's really what it comes down to. Keep knocking on the doors, keep sending emails, keep making phone calls. Eventually something will happen.
And the other piece to that, for those, again, people that aren't real follow alarm processing time, there's a lot of them. It's just not, I forget if it was Chief, if you were saying, there's a CALEA side that pays close attention to times. They have a lot of standards. NFPA has some standards. Was it 1230, 1220? What is it, 1230? Has standards on alarm processing, 1710. But APCO's real similar, and so is NENA, National Emergency Number Association. Mind you, they all have standards, and they're all right on top of each other. So when a dispatch center doesn't listen, make sure you know that there's a lot of agencies. And I saw somebody consolidated dispatch center, they had a procedure manual, and every time they cited something, they cited one of those 4 or 5 agencies where they got the procedure. Don't have control, blah, blah, blah. If an agency has only had ERF 5 times out of 50 times, I think it's 50 times, or 55 times out of 50 times, what happens? The following cycle for the ERF does not change. Maybe you want to feel it up there? I mean, most of you make too many ERFs, you're too easy.
So-
you have a hard, you probably Chief Donnie, you don't make a
So
lot.
if I understand correctly, only 5 times they got their effective response force
Well, this
on
is-
scene?
Yeah,
Is
let's
that-
just say you only make a few, so whatever they define their ERF as, you can't make many. I imagine you're 15, 16, 17
Yeah,
people for
we're-
your ERF.
Yeah, we're 15,
15.
For ours. But actually we are, because of our automatic mutual aid and our dispatch center, we're in the 70 percentile of getting it within 10 minutes. So
You don't make many. Do you have many working fires where you got to assemble an ERF?
we're typically in the 7 to 10 range per year. But certainly, when you look at it as well, and that's one of the things now that the no chart has, is the amount of numbers that your times are based on in your 90
Right.
percentile.
Anybody else making very few ERF? Well, you?
Dave, there's one thing that you may not have that type of response if it's not normal for your area, say a USAR response, right? So your effective response is if you run 2 rescues, 2 engines, right? So you run 2 stations on that call. That's what you would call in, and then your mutual aid team would come in behind you. So what we did as the airport is what we send to an ALS call or what we send to a fire alarm call is what we would send to that hazmat call. So we use the times of what we respond to a fire call to effectively show that that's our first response to that type of call. And that's kind of how you work with the system. You may not do it all the time, but your normal response would be the same over here of what you respond to every single day. So you just capture those times and explain that, and that works fine too.
And that's Mike brings that up, that's an important piece of the puzzle. And so Western Wayne County, which we're part of, has a Western Wayne County hazmat team, Western Wayne County urban search and rescue team. And one of the problems, I actually am the oversight chief of that, and I worked with Mike when he was going through his accreditation because we were not necessarily meeting the standards of accreditation in our reporting for the county teams. And so you have to have that conversation because that's part of your accreditation process. And so we've now, I think, done a better job of recording when the teams are rolling out on these calls, response times, tracking that data into our reports versus just writing a generic narrative of what occurred. So if you have those type of response teams in your jurisdictions, it's important you have that communication with them to make sure that, because accreditation is going to come in and ask for reports. If you've had any USAR call-outs in the past 3 years, we want to see those reports. And they're not looking for just a narrative that says, we went on a trench, we extricated the guy, and we turned him over to local EMS. That's important.
Anybody else? You're good though, and if you use automatic aid to make up your ERF, right?
Correct. But you're really back to knowing what your data says. And do you have an effective response force, and is that assembled for the incident, or did you cancel en route? Well, then it's not an effective response force, and get rid of it on the data set. So if you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 10, 15, whatever the number is, document it, and that's the end of it. Keep it simple.
Yeah, keep it simple.
Because this is kind of one of my things with accreditation, the risk assessment issue that we're having now is you start looking at these numbers and how you're slicing things up, and eventually you slice it up so much, it doesn't mean anything. So that, back to keep it simple and try to make numbers that make sense to you as opposed to
Absolutely.
checking this box for CFAI.
Yep, self-assessment. No, it's a self-assessment model, sorry. No, I agree with you.
And that's a hard argument to make with some team leaders, because I don't care who they are, it seems like they've all got kind of their own little niche in the way that they look at things, and you still got a standard that they're trying to adhere to, but sometimes I think you kind of got to hold them to that standard too when they come to you recycling.
And I agree. I think that's where that interpretation guide comes really in handy too.
Absolutely. There is,
That's
I can tell you
gold.
this, there is no, for as a team leader, in fact, St. Louis, they took 32 of us out, they trained us all together, we went out to St. Louis, or, no, it was out to Kansas. They do that every couple of years to try to get us on the same page. But a negative is you can get team leaders of different thought processes, but that's also a positive too, especially as you stay in the process. To keep you the same person come in and repeat the same recommendations to you, that's it's nice to get a different team. And, but the answer, I guess, really to this question is, I guess I started with, I was at that agency in California who they didn't assemble an ERF. They said for 15 years. They were accredited. Statistically, most reports, whether they're mine or ones I review, constantly they put you don't have enough data to produce the chart. If you don't have the data, we do not add it. And I can tell you in Toledo, which makes a lot of difference. We did not, in many areas, we did not complete charts. We don't assemble the ERF. Because one of the issues we talk about is typically for us, even for an extrication, and people do this different. But we might send 2 engines, usually because that's what we send to motor vehicle accidents. And then they get there, and I think, didn't I go around with that one guy in this? Then we get there and they realize it's an extrication. So now we send the Army. Okay, so we do assemble it, but that doesn't meet the definition because they all got different starting alarm processing times. And so we told that, you know what, this doesn't meet the definition, and he bought it. So, whatever. So, I mean, there's different ways to do it.
And a different team leader would look at that differently, though, potentially.
Well, yeah, it's pretty hard to meet if you talk to them. I know most of them. I think most team leaders would be Chief Donahue. Most team leaders listen. And the worse you get out is the recommendation. But here's what happens then. Then it comes to somebody like me at the end, and you go reject. Yeah. For those that aren't in the process, you get accredited, then the next 4 years you do an annual compliance report. Your recommendations, you got some choices like accept. Well, we accept it, sounds sort of good, but you may never implement it. That was the second column. And then the third column is reject. And I get those all the time. And I look at them and say they rejected it. I agree. Let's move on. Now, if they reject it and it's logical, then there might be more of a conversation. So, oh.
That was my question. So, you say our ERF is 13 people, 13 months. And the excuse, so we advertise that. People hear it, okay, well, you only need it once a year on average. So we say this is what it is, you can't meet it. Well, you don't guys have enough data points to say what we're going to. I could have 1,000 fires. I know today I'm never going to meet that. So now, to me, if we're going to be honest, it's we need to either get the resources to meet it or adjust it to something we can meet. But that comes with a cost, either financially or politically, because now you're telling the citizens, well, you actually are getting less service than what we say. And that's the struggle is it's almost going to take, CPSC to come in to say, this is your ERF, you said it is, you can't beat it. Because then that would force us, because otherwise I'm afraid it's just, well, we'll try again next cycle, we have mutual aid. It's just everybody's so far away that even if they get this national meeting, they can't make it there at that time. So
Don't sell yourself short because understand the difference between a benchmark and a baseline. Your benchmark's the goal. That's the gold standard you're trying to reach, and you may never ever reach that. And if you do reach it, then you need to bump it up to something a little bit more unattainable. So, I don't see that as being a problem that you can't ever meet it. You should be striving to try to meet it with whatever resources you have on hand and available to you. So,
And I think that brings up, two good, perfect points. There's 2 ways of looking at this. Number one, why aren't you making this? Is this because there's just a low volume of calls, such as you may only have 5 reported structure fires or maybe 5 working fires? versus you're getting the working fires, you're getting the quantity, you're just not getting your effective response force on scene in that time. And I wholeheartedly agree. I think that's where you have your baselines and your benchmarks, your goals, and really what you're able to meet. So if your goal is to get them there on 13 minutes, you just take that as a part of your benchmark. Then your baseline, if it's taking 15 minutes or 17 minutes to get there, that's what you end up stating that as.
That's the perfect kind of thing to roll into your strategic plan. Hey, we have this benchmark. We know what's going to need it. What are we working on? Build on that.
I guess the video
Plays into that.
There's enough time to know we're not doing anything to narrow it.
$5.
I'll get it staff,
I'll get it signed.
And you have to be realistic, and this is what we just kind of came upon with our strategic plan, is you have to be realistic and you have to be honest with your elected officials. In Canton Township, I don't determine the service levels. Our elected officials determine service levels. Now, it's my job to make recommendations. So the first thing we asked, so we did a community-based strategic plan. We brought in community members. We said, what service level do you want to see in Canton Township? And they told us. And then we went back and we met with them. We had 2 elected officials sitting on that panel for the community. And then we went back to our elected officials and we asked them, what level of service do you want to see in Canton Township? And at the end of the day, what their expectation was, we told them, this is what it's going to take to meet it. Now, in a growing community, we can say, okay, in 2019, I need 6 additional firefighters. That's what we told them. If this is the expectation of the township board, I need 6 additional firefighters. They approved that. You look at this 5-year plan, I can reasonably predict the future based off past and how our run volume is going up. But because our community is growing so rapidly, I don't know what's going to happen 5 years from now. So what we did is we have that 5-year plan, but we also left it with in terms of staffing, we left it open so that we could take back to our board a recommendation during budget time every November. So if their expectation remains the same, this is the service level we want to provide in Canton Township. We want response times below 6 minutes. We want to make sure that we have firefighters in the stations available to respond all the time, et cetera, et cetera. Then every November, I'm going to go back with a recommendation and say, this is the staffing levels that we need. This is the distribution we need. We're telling them right now, we've got 3 fire stations, and there is no possible way. You look at the GIS maps, you look at the data, there's no possible way that we can be on scene and everywhere in Canton Township in under 6 minutes or less. There's parts of our jurisdiction where it's going to take us 11 or 12 minutes to get to just because of where our stations are located. So if that's the expectation, we need a 4th fire station. And so part of our 5-year plan is, if you want us to meet that goal everywhere in the township, we have to build another station. They may come back and they say, no way. But then understand, if it's a no way, then we have to revisit what that service level expectation is of the community and of our elected officials.
You just mentioned this is an area that I've been struggling with my chief and I. You just mentioned that you went to your elected officials and asked what kind of service do you want. Can you be more specific on the questions you asked them? We're struggling with, how do we ask somebody who's not in the fire service, because they want FDNY, but they want to pay for voluntary fire service.
That's a great question. So for us, it started off as an education. So we put together a PowerPoint presentation and we outlined where we're at, our baseline, if you will. Where are we at today? What areas we put maps up, we showed them based off the GIS data and based off our response data. Here's the township, here's your 4-minute or less response areas, here's your 6-minute, 6 to 4, here's your 8-minute, here's your 10, 12, so on. And then we had the conversation. We talked about that effective response force. How many times do we get a structure fire? Because we're a fire department that provides ALS transporting service, how many times do we get a structure fire? And I've got 3 ambulances out. So with a minimum manning of 16, I've just lost 6 that are at a hospital with a patient. So now I'm down to 10. What really came in critical for us with our elected officials is when we put the mutual aid data and how we went from maybe requesting mutual aid 8 times a year to request the mutual aid upwards of 40 to 50 times a year. Because over that 10-year curve, as our run volume continued to increase, our staffing was flatlined. We started off 10 years ago with a 15-man minimum. We've only increased that one. But our run volume has gone from about 5,000 calls a year to over 9,000 calls a year. And so we told them, as that continues to happen, response times are going to continue to rise. What do you want to see? And the answer was, we want to see those response times back down to where they were. We want to see manpower. We don't want to see, if a resident of Canton Township calls and wants an ambulance, we want an ambulance coming from Canton. We don't want an ambulance coming from the neighboring jurisdiction. And so you have to tell them, and you have to be realistic. Yeah, we all want that FDNY fire department. We all want to be able to have 20 firefighters showing up on a single-family residential structure fire, but we're not good. There's no tax base doesn't support that. So, what do we have tax base, and then what can we reasonably accomplish? And they have to know what the baseline is and what the data is in order to be able to give you that expectation. But a lot of it is education. When we brought our residents in, the first meeting that we had with our residents was supposed to be about a 2 to 4 hour meeting. I think we ended up going 5 or 6, and we never got anything accomplished as to what they wanted to see, because it was more what they didn't know the fire department or the police department provided. And so it became, we spent the first entire session just telling them and educating them about, and partly that's our fault. We should have been doing that all along, because our community had no idea. Some of the members in the panel had no idea that if you called an ambulance, it was your firefighters that were showing up. They thought it was a whole separate entity.
And hopefully that elected official lives in that 12-minute response time area, because that helps.
How do you guys advertise your statement? So when we did ours, safe space, the administration scheduled it for a weeknight at 5 o'clock. So how many people do you think we got there? We got 2. But we had our community input. Sure. So, I completely agree, but it's just we're bottlenecked from, we do it to, we check the box, we need any reliable, information to have these open conversations with. So I'm just curious, how do you advertise, how do you get people, how many people do you get, how do you get them back?
So in 2013, we did it just like you did. We opened up 2 public forums. We broadcast that in what we call the Canton Focus. It's a newsletter that goes out to all of our residents. We talked about it at board meetings. We put it on our website, and at both of the community forums, I think the first night we had 3 people show up. There was really no input. The second night, I think we maybe had 2. So this go around, we decided to do it differently, because obviously that didn't get what we wanted. So Canton Township is 36 square miles. What we did is we broke, our police department has 4 areas, so we used those 4 response areas, and we sought out residents from each one of the different 4 areas, so that we made sure that we hit every corner, every box in the township, if you will. We reached out to our church groups. We reached out through our elected officials to the various groups that they participated in. We reached out to our community groups, and then so we established that core group and of the people that wanted to be involved. And then what we did is we knew that we wanted to incorporate our business community. We knew that we couldn't. How do we keep the group manageable? So what we did is we reached out to the Chamber of Commerce, and we had them represent business. So before we ever met, we sent out a survey to all of our residents, and the survey had a list of questions of, have they used the fire department services, have they used EMS services, how would they rate the services, what are their expectations, etc. And then we had a separate survey made up for our business community, and through the Chamber of Commerce, we distributed that to every business in Canton Township. And so that was kind of our baseline, if you will, of what the business community felt about the fire department and what the residential community felt about the fire department. Now we brought that group together. We scheduled meetings. We set the meetings in our public safety building. We brought them in, and then we just kept going until we got to where we needed to be. I think we had 3 or 4 meetings. All said and done, we ended up 3 or 4 meetings. We thought we'd be able to do it in 1 or 2, but it took 3 or 4 to actually get to for what we want to determine what that community expectation was.
How many people is that?
I'm sorry.
How many people?
In the board, in the group, we picked 2 from each area, the business, and then we had 2 elected officials, so 11 or 12 people is what we had. The problem is that, you know, we wanted to make sure it was manageable. That's the key, is keeping it manageable, because otherwise you spend a lot of time and you never get to where you want to be. So we try to keep the group diverse and manageable.
We did something very, very similar in our first strategic planning. We had about 40 people participate in it. So you're talking at that time a city of about 30,000. We're up to 40,000. We just redid ours in 2018. But we also use social media and an application called Nextdoor. So we ended up meeting with various Rotary clubs, church groups, and so forth. We used our Chamber of Commerce or Safety Committee to get information, do surveys, but we used Nextdoor as an avenue to send out a survey. And I was very pleased with our results. We had over 150 people reply back to us. So when you look at the difference between the two, we were finding it was hard to get people to meet. Just with the lives that people have right now. So use something that they're familiar with, and that was through social media. And we got very good information back. The thing that we liked about Nextdoor was there was a registration process with that you could end up verifying that the people that were providing you the information were actually city residents as well. So that's what we appreciated as far as that.
Were you part of the?
I was not. It was actually 2 administrations prior. And the setup was like the crickets, the 2-3 people. It wasn't valid. An interesting survey that's it's been a double-edged sword. So the city did something that I imagine most of your other cities have done as well, is this National Citizen Survey, which is a big national, pretty much what it says, but a statistically valid survey, and we came back like 5 percentage points higher than, we're highest rated department in the city, well above anyone else. And so now it's kind of like, well, obviously the city's happy with our results. How can I argue that we need more? So that's already been used against me.
Really?
Yeah, we're the highest rated, but we're not going to give you any more. Thanks.
We're higher than you.
But internal to our city. So public works, fire, police. Yeah, it was internal to Ann Arbor. So of all the city services rated, we were 5 percentage points higher, and we were at like a 97 of all this for the residents, and they really touted this as this is statistically a valid survey, and we're going to use this for budgetary. And I'm like, well, damn it, I've got the best rating. That should mean something. No, it just means that they like you. Great.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I've never seen a fire department survey. You send them out, people are afraid to send them out to citizens. They always come back. They love the fire department.
Yeah.
They love it. Hate police, love fire. And when the budget cuts, they cut fire.
Yeah. Police got 4 FTs in this last budget. I got nothing.
I think they covered the volunteers, the EFR team, EFR teams. I think that you guys covered that. This is a good one for you. We'll start down here. Do you have a dedicated, this is probably for a new agency, so do you have a dedicated staff to accreditation? I would assume to accreditation. If so, who and how many? And are they dedicated, I guess, 100% to accreditation?
Sure. So in Indianapolis, we have around 1,350 employees. We're right under 1,200 sworn with new class coming in. Just to give some background where we're at. We have currently 3 people who are dedicated to accreditation. We fall underneath Chief Henson, the Office of Planning. Okay, so as the accreditation manager, that is my full-time role. It has been packaged with ISO as well, but they don't completely overlap. But obviously, there's some heavy connection between the two. We just grew that staff to 2 people. I just was given permission to bring in 2 new people here in the last officially January, and we're hoping to bring in another one later this year. Private Bazance has been detailed, so he's in the office with us working on accreditation all day, every day.
What are they doing? SAM, self-assessment manual? What are they writing everything?
remit of the two that just came in is concentrating on the community risk assessment. For the most part, the gentleman who's not here works on getting the data, pulling the data. Private Byzance works on the presentation into that, designing out the CRA and helping us with our KPIs and goal meetings that are part of our appraisal program that we developed. And there's more than enough work, obviously.
Just a curiosity, sir.
Yeah.
So you get out of accreditation, Brown Chief says we're done with it. How many people go back to the line? Do you end your planning department?
No, sir. Accreditation is a process, not a program.
What I'm saying, your chief so you end it, when you end your planning division, your chief says he's not going to follow. He doesn't.
If Chief decides that it goes away, Chief, I mean, he has the
I guess
power
I'm
to do that.
wondering if you still have a planning.
Planning stays regardless.
Because I'm always curious, people say, because this will lead to a question, especially for newer, when I see some people that are newer. There's a big debate how many hours and how many, and I always try to separate it because, in my opinion, you should have a strategic plan, whether you're in the accreditation following that model or not. That's my opinion. So I guess I'm curious how many people are really dedicated to just accreditation.
So technically, there are two positions right now that are just accreditation. I guess really just one. It's a gray area where the title of Captain Tiernan that was brought in is technically performance and compliance. It was brought in under the guise of the needs of accreditation. That said, we view this as planning, accreditation, ISO. It's the same thing. You can't split the two away. How would you plan without the information that we're trying to gather? And
We just brought back planning also the office where it kind of went to the wayside. So when they both kind of came online, we kind of married the two and said, hey, we're gonna take that direction and walk it together. So really, you're better control either way. You get rid of one, you're really not getting rid of it because we're based on each other. So
Accredited agent, every accredited agency I know keeps dropping that. The ISOs are going phenomenal. I don't know if you guys have all seen that. But yes.
we've also brought in 7 interns, and we only get them for about 2.5 months, but they've been able to do a lot of work for us as well, primarily working through our 700 data and our risk class and category breakdown. But having those bodies there, it's a good opportunity for them. We try to set those projects up so that they're not just secretaries going through, pulling out our numbers for us, but then it's okay, so here are our results, and now go out and find out how that matches with other departments, and then share what would you do with that information. And so it gives them an opportunity to reach out and spread their wings a little bit, meet some other departments, and get a real feel for what fire administration is about and where it's headed. So
dedicated staff to accreditation, dedicated, and so how many?
None at this point in time. What we did do though last year was hire a data GIS person, but that's a civilian employee. She just actually graduated from out of college with a GIS degree. But we have her not only working on maps and solutions and so forth from that, but also doing our pre-planned information as well.
Now I would think a question on that's probably more typical.
Was that hired for the fire department or was
Yes.
it hired for your township?
Yeah, nope, that's hired for our city, for our city fire department, strictly only that.
He goes, no, and you use that person for a lot of different.
Yes.
Who's going to write your self-assessment, man?
It's going to be a team of people doing it.
When you get to that point,
When we get-
the FDV guy to write it.
Yeah, and actually we were talking on the way up here is sitting down, we're wrapping up on our second standard of cover. And we'll end up going back after this and then identifying who's going to take care of what categories. And I think that's the easiest and one of the best ways of doing it, getting the people that are out in the field and familiar with that to write those.
You don't have anybody dedicated at the moment?
Correct.
No, I only have
Dedicated?
No, I have 2 full-time administrative positions, but they're taxed with many other things on top of accreditation. Right. What we did is we formed an accreditation committee, which was led by the chief and the deputy chief, and then it was made up of some line suppression personnel. Which, in retrospect, I think it was good because it helped with the buy-in of the accreditation process once they started to understand. Initially, there was a lot of pushback. once they got involved and they understood and they finally started to see some of the changes that accreditation helped us make, I think it was good to do it that way.
Doug, what, I mean, you got dedicated.
Zero.
How does it work?
Well, the approach I took since I've been accreditation manager with the department was to institutionalize that whole process. So our line guys all play a role in it. The captains all have an area of responsibility with one of the lieutenants, and some of the firefighters that have certain aptitudes and skills and abilities that are advantageous for that process. So it's a matter of building out systems that are kind of self-sustaining, and then hopefully trying to train people up to step into those roles. The struggle that we've had is take a firefighter that doesn't know anything at all about it other than got this accreditation thing going on. And you step up and you become a lieutenant, and now you've got some more areas of responsibility, and it's like, I don't even know how to write a performance appraisal, and then when you start breaking down the self-assessment manual and assigning areas of responsibility there and expecting them to write to that, it becomes a little problematic in some instances. Other people really rise to the occasion and the challenge and do well with it. So that's the biggest message I would put out to everybody is make sure you institutionalize it from the ground up. And the other thing is don't sell it as accreditation for accreditation's sake. It's a template. It's a way that you can run your department. It's a tool to get means to an end.
Yeah, and I guess for the new people, that's a fine line. You always hear people say it took thousands of hours, but then it's a hard line, barring you guys, real big. It's hard to have dedicated people. Small fire departments, we don't either. So it's definitely hard to have just dedicated people just do that. And
Well, things like the risk assessment, our line guys do pre-plans. So the system that we built around that to collect data and document that, provide access to it for emergency responses, that all has the data in that system that we need to do the risk assessment. So it's, they're doing it every day and don't really realize what they're contributing towards it, but there again, it's only as good as the person that's going out and doing the pre-plan. So.
Right. I don't know if anything else on that. This one's funny. Can you read it? Somebody pointed that out to me. Was on your like the guy asked why our logo doesn't have.
Oh yeah, yeah. I didn't know the answer. I thought that sounded good though, right? They're off with this.
That was sort of funny. Next edition, somebody's asked about if you're not in the process. There will be a new edition. For those, I think it's 2022. Which is when people they're going from 2022 in March. We have to do it. That's just another question. Anything else we can ask of this? I mean, you get a great chance. Good panel of people up there, the chiefs.
One thing I've found to just be real helpful, our city is always kind of keeping up with the Joneses, and so the gentleman from Portage was mentioning being consistent with data and numbers. So like one that I've found, and it's kind of been a unique connection, is Cambridge, Massachusetts. So they've got Harvard. So another large research school. And so that's been a good one for, they've kind of been a similar process, and they've kind of been a partner with some of this. I was just able to establish some connections. Like Canton's next door, but unfortunately, they don't have this big university in the middle of them, which really drives things. And so that's been real helpful to me, is to be able to also find departments and make sure, hey, what's your turnout time? What's your response time? What's your ERF? So then I can go to my council and say, Cambridge, Massachusetts is doing this. Evanston, Illinois is doing this. I use a lot of Big Ten and then kind of some other ones that with universities. Like a Columbus, I got to throw out because they're such a bigger. Well, they suck, but they're such a bigger city. They're not a good comparable, and so that's been that's a constant one, and it might be others too. But I'm always asked, what are these other communities doing? And I found that that's one of the most powerful tools that I've been able to go back to them to say, these are what all these other communities are doing, this is what we're not doing. And then, that's been helpful, but the struggle of when he said that about making sure you're saying the same things has been very difficult, because some other departments that I've gone to and asked for data, it's like, this isn't making like the 40-second call turnaround time. It's like, I know their numbers are bullshit, and I can't, and I hesitate even putting that in front of my elected officials, because, like, yeah, I called them and this is what they gave back to me, but I'm like, there is no way. Unless they're just this all-star dialed-in department, which they could be, but again, what I'm seeing, and you'll see, we're not that far off from these other ones. But just having that group of comparables has been very, very powerful, and also just knowing too, and they reciprocate. So I'll give them data too, and it's been a two-way street. But that data warehouse has been a nightmare. I've worked with the IFC, worked with NFPA, about trying to get comparables, like who can make the ERF of 1710 and who's doing this. And that nationally, that package is not out there.
No, and nobody.
Yeah.
A couple buyers. So you can't put your own standard. It's up to you to follow 1710 if you want to. Not quite.
You mentioned I can do this all day. You mentioned a turnout time study. I'm just curious who's performed one and how. What did you do?
Turnout time study.
Internal.
You asking me? Lawrence, Kansas. Lawrence Douglas Fire Department. Merger up there. Lawrence, pretty good sized city. Guy named Bill Stark out there did it. He said, just like you said, 1710 is something we said it here, 1710. We're not close to it. We're not close. But I was done with that. I only want to deal with what we really do. Our baseline, we can work on that. Really, some people have always said there should be almost like a second goal, something that's a little more realistic. Yeah, 1710, we're going to use that as sort of the consensus standard. And there's other people that said as a secondary baseline type goal. What goal you set for yourself is up to your department.
I guess my question is more, how did you conduct the study? If you did, how was it performed? How was that study conducted?
That was Lawrence, Kansas. I just know that he went into, because they had quite a few stations. They had two-story stations, they had single stations. And they went in with stopwatch. This is memory, this is 5 years ago.
Jamie did one for our department. He can talk about the issue. Many of our fire stations aren't, when they're designed, they don't take into account turnout times. So Jamie can talk about some of the things that we did.
We used our local cable channel to come in and actually videotape us with stopwatches on the screen, so that it wasn't just somebody there saying that they did it. It's something that we have that's tangible that I can show to someone and say, look, if a medical tone comes in or if a fire tone comes in, this is how long it takes a firefighter to get up, find the run on the map, get to the truck, put his gear on, get in the truck, turn the key on, wait for the radio to turn on, for them to even pick up the mic and say we're on the air. Us, it was roughly like a minute 20 for that to happen. So right then and there, that's what our baseline is going to be. That's how we were establishing it. The idea at the time was to do that at all the stations, but we were starting to find that it didn't matter what the station layout was for us. It's a major walk from where the firefighters are at to get into the truck, to get them in the truck, turn it on, use the mic to say they're on the air. So that's basically how we did it. It's nothing more formal than that, except for there's a document written saying that we did this on this day, and it's one of our references in our SAM.
Was your start line always the bed? Did you?
No, we did it both ways. We did a bedroom version. We also did a dinner version, basically the dinner table. A couple other versions we were going to try to. What's that? As soon as the tone went off. See, we use station toning. So if the tone goes off in that station, they know it's their run. So there's no central dispatch to stations 1, 2, or 3. As soon as the tone goes off, they know they need to get up and start moving. It wasn't always like that. I mean, years ago, it was one of those wait and see kind of things, and we were waiting to see what station it was, and then they'd either relax or jump up into action. But for us, as soon as the tone goes off, that's when the clock started.
do you guys have computer, do you do CAT and voice? Did you see time differences between you guys hitting their radios or walking down the hallway and then getting in the truck and then?
No, we don't. We don't really track that except for we've done enough training to know that we expect a certain time. So if we start seeing someone coming way under that, I can only start to assume that those guys are doing it from their walk to the truck, right? I mean, that's what our baseline is trying to establish. That this is what it should be, right? So if we start seeing them under, I don't think anyone's running to the truck. I don't think so.
I guess my question would be, why are we doing a study on this? Because you've got your data in front of you.
Well, we
When
want
you
to
break
it for us. That's why.
Yeah, so when you break that out and start looking at per station, and time of day has a big thing. I mean, at our number one station, guys are either upstairs or downstairs. And, you know, the time of day obviously has a huge impact on how fast they're gonna get out.
Yep. I would say just to tie it in, because we probably got to move on here. I think like the chief said is, once you understand your community expectations, and really you don't go into the weeds. You don't have to ask the citizens, what should our alarm processing time be? What should our turnout time? You don't go into the weeds with your citizens like that. What you do is, what are your expectations from when you call us on the phone, assuming you pick it up, to get an apparatus to my house to help me? It's one time, total response. That's it. That is the only thing that matters in the end result, is when my mom or your mom calls, and when do you get there from that phone call? The only reason you go into the weeds is when you have issues. And that's really, in my opinion, why 1710 did, why Accreditation does, any model you want to look at, AFCO, NINA. You go into the weeds when you have issues. When all of a sudden I say, you call 911 and Dave, for our strokes, our heart attacks, our working fires, we get an apparatus on the scene in 12 minutes. Is that acceptable? Probably not based upon your citizen standards, probably not based on your AHJ standards. So once you say, hey, it's 12 minutes from the time I pick up the phone to somebody comes, and that becomes your time, then you dig into the weeds. You got to have that capability to dig and say, what's causing it? Is it alarm processing? Firefighters aren't turning on, or we don't have enough stations? Or apparatus. So the weeds is, to me, I think you got to look at the big picture and then be able to go into the weeds. I don't know if that sums it up. Why don't we take just a 5-minute break?